Hi there. Good morning or afternoon or evening, whatever it is where you are. Um, Welcome to Hearthside. I am the author on this blog. I make accessible copies of everything. I'm just sort of catching up on a few because I haven't had any quiet recording time for some time now. And that may continue into the future, so I'm just trying to catch up here, and then I may fall behind again. I will eventually get out accessible copies for everything, I promise. But yeah, this is where I'm at right now. That our home situation is making it a bit more difficult just to find a quiet space at the moment. But what I want to talk about in this video is my blog about Yngvi-Freyr and his descendants and the heathen connection to the natural world. So something that has been coming up a lot this year for me is Freyr in association with this year, in association with the summer season, with the Ardir from Rune Rasmussen's book, and connection to fertility with the Aun slash Uncycle, and basically the focus of many heathens on taking on resetting of things, and in many cases things to do with our environment. But what interests me is, while Freyr keeps coming up again and again in circles that I'm involved in, not everyone was aware that Freyr and Ying seem to be the same deity, and also that there are the Ynglings in the sagas who are a lineage that say that they're descended from Freyr. So this is just an informative post basically about Freyr, about Ying, about different associations with Freyr, with, for example, Saint Eric, and associations with the Yngling Dynasty. So there's a lot to cover here, and I find it really interesting, especially at this point in time, to be focusing on that. So let's just dive in. So May is the perfect time to discuss Freyr. So is June. Honestly, summer is. So I wrote this post in May, but yeah, summer is the perfect time to discuss Freyr. In the Nordic animist year, Saint Eric's Day occurs near the end of May and is equated with Freyr, and has a ritual similar to the procession of Nerthus. So if you're familiar with that, sort of taking an idol and going around the land with it for fertility. And in this book, it also mentions that Freyr is the patron god of the Ynglings. But who is Freyr? And who are the Ynglings? So there's Freyr, and he is a very complicated figure in the lore, because he's described as a Vanir, he's described as the Aesir, sometimes he's described as Elfar, or the king of the elves. And it's even suggested that Freyr is actually a man. So who is he? Freyr has many different names, as do many of our gods, and he's known as Freyr, Frey, Yngvi, and sometimes Yngvi-Freyr, as well as all the kennings, of course. And he's also often equated with King Frodi. Oh, sorry. That was an alarm that I don't need. The Ynglings were a dynasty of Swedish and Norwegian kings. Their stories are recorded in the Ynglinga Saga, the Icelandic book, also in Beowulf, but they're referred to as the Skilfings. And the Ynglings claim to be descended from Freyr as well as from Njord. And the fair-haired dynasty is also said to be descended from the Ynglings. So they've been around for a long time through the history of the sagas. And Snorri mentions the Ynglings as well, but calls them the Skilfings. So that is similar to what they're called in Beowulf. But of course, Snorri also tries to make Yngvi into the son of Odin, and Odin into a man rather than a god. And another place that we see the Ynglings talked about is Saxo, who's describing the Battle of Bravalla. These were kindred of the god Frey, and most faithful witnesses to the gods. They were men, ready of hand, quick in counsel, and very close friends of Ring. They likewise held the god Freyr to be the founder of their race. So, how come Freyr has so many names? The name Yng derives from the Proto-Germanic Yngwas. So, it is likely that Yng, or some variation, was the original name for Freyr. It's also possible the meaning of this name was ancestor, suggesting that people at that time and place believed to be descended from Yng, much as the Ynglings did. And there was a Germanic tribe called Yngve-Freyr. I might be mispronouncing that. But it's spelled Yngvaeone. So this Western Germanic tribe lived along the coast of the North Sea and in parts of what we know now as Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. Yng has like a bunch of different possible meanings as well. It is associated with spear or even groin, which perhaps is suggestive of the nature of Yng as a deity. And it seems the name shifted from Yng to Yngve, and then later to Freyr. Since Freyr just means lord, it might actually have been a title for Yng rather than an additional name. But over time, as language shifted, that was forgotten. Freyr became the more common name to be used. If we look at Tacitus, he tells a different and interesting story about the Yngve-Freyr people, in which there's a god called Tusto, which means twin, who gives birth to Manus, who may be another god or a man, and then that Manus gave birth to 3 tribes that include the Yngve-Freyr people. Yng here is described as the son of Manus, and this is interesting because it later had implications for Freyr being equated with Christ, because the son of man instead of Manus. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. And even if you're not familiar with Yng or Yngvi as names for Freyr, you've likely heard Yng before if you think about it, because Yng is the name of a rune. And you'll see that there are associations that are similar to those of Freyr with the rune. So if we look at the Anglo-Saxon rune poem, and its mention of Yng, it says, Yng was first amidst the East Danes, seen by men until he eastward over the sea departed. His wagon ran after. Thus the Heathens named that hero. So it's really interesting. This particular rune poem is actually talking about Yng as a he, which suggests that it is, in fact, this deity, Yng, or Yngvi-Freyr. Freyr is a god of peace and pleasure, as well as being connected to agriculture and sacral kingship. Words to describe Freyr are virility, prosperity, protection, fertility, sunshine, rain, brightness, and fair weather. So he is often depicted in some of these forms, like shining, golden, and often depicted with phallic iconography to represent that fertility aspect. Many places and people have names derived from Yng or Freyr. So, if not the son of Manus, he is definitely the friend of man, because there are several attestations to him befriending individual men and not just tribes. So this is unusual overall in the lore. His associations with sunshine and association with carts make some speculate that he was initially a solar deity. And it's not unfounded to guess that, because we know that Freyr's mother was Nerthis, an earth goddess, and she was associated with carts and connected to the seasons. So it makes sense that she was the earth, he was the sky or solar deity, the sun that shines on the earth. In some aspects, but of course all deities are much more complicated than that. We don't want to be too reductionist in the way that we view them, so these are like all the things that he is associated with, and probably I missed some. But you're still probably wondering about the connection to Frodi, and I talked about it briefly in my our-year post, but we can also talk about it here. So there's a story that's told that Freyr and Freyr is used in one telling of it. Frodi is used in another telling of it. Basically, the story says that a king ruled over the Swedish people, and during that reign, the land was prosperous. Then, when Freyr or Frodi died, the priests kept it secret and continued to collect gold for Freyr or Frodi as taxes after his death, in hopes to keep the people happy and to keep the land prosperous. They then would pour all the gold into his mound, and the prosperity continued over the land. Eventually, the people did realize what was happening, but because the land had remained prosperous, they were not upset about it. And so when they found out, it was then believed that the land would remain prosperous so long as he remained there in Sweden. So, it's difficult to draw many decisive conclusions about Freyr. I would definitely say he's a god and not a man, but whether he's a seer, Vanir, Alfar, it's very hard to determine. And maybe we're trying too hard to create lines where they don't need to be in modern heathenry, and that maybe a lot of different deities and beings in heathenry historically crossed many of those lines because they were meant to be crossed. So it seems to me for sure Yng was the deity, Freyr is his title. He's a friend of man and a protector of man, and it seems like people experienced very real relationships with him on a personal level in the past. And he's very different from many of the other warlike gods that we have in heathenry. What we mostly know about his nature, he's definitely a god who wants you to build relations, and who wants to build relations with you, and that he helps with agriculture and more generally with prosperity. So I don't believe that people were really descended from Freyr in a literal sense. I think that, like the kings who claimed to be descended from Odin, it was a claim to power that was being made, and that it's not useful to us in modern times to try to claim descendants from a god. But that said, he is associated with the word ancestor, so perhaps that means we should re-examine what we know about Freyr and how he might be connected to ancestry and our connections with other than human beings, even. And perhaps we should think about how we are descended from the earth, or how our lore talks about us coming from the trees, and what sort of ancestor roles exist there. So instead of trying to wear Freyr or other gods as an ancestral badge of honor, we look at our ancestry as how we are connected to all things. So yeah, just a bunch of stuff to food for thought. There's lots more on Freyr. There's lots more things to read about Freyr if you're looking into the lore, if you're looking at people talking about the lore. He's fairly prominently discussed, so I suggest looking more if you're interested, and I hope that you found this informative and that it explains to you a little bit more about Freyr and the name Yng or Yngvi and who the Ynglings were. I will see you next time.